You probably have seen that last week I released the very first modules of my Frame of Motion course. And with that, also my custom-made course platform. And one of the features that people were really excited about is my own custom picture-in-picture player. So what does that picture-in-picture player look like? Well, as soon as you start playing a video, it just plays regularly, but once you start scrolling away, it pops in from the side. And if you then scroll back up, you will see that the video just pops back into place again. Or if you scroll down, you can also just pause it here. You get all of the video interfaces as well. You even have a close icon where you can just close it and then it will move back into its original position. And all of this actually took really little effort to build. And that's what I want to show you today. So the first thing that's very important to know is that you of course do have a browser API for picture-in-picture playing. And also you can trigger that by clicking with your right button on top of the video and then choosing picture-in-picture. That will also open a picture-in-picture window, and then you can simply interact with the page as well. However, clicking with your mouse on top of the video is kind of annoying if you can do it automatically. Then there is this JavaScript API that can also make picture-in-picture video for you. However, you can only trigger that on click, so you can't do that on scroll. So I had to roll my own. And I ended up with such a simple code that I thought this is definitely worth a video to show you guys how you can implement this in your own websites as well. So let's not wait any longer and start coding. So for the starting point of today's video, I created a very basic page. That page already has a video player in there and has a little bit of room to scroll. And that is what you see in the app.tsx. And inside of there is this video player component, and that is what we will be looking at today. So also, please don't look at the way I created some random blocks down here, because that's not the way you should do it actually. But that's for a different video. So we're going to focus on this video player component. If we open that, you see that there's a few components in here. And those components are coming from the MediaChrome package. That is a package created by the Mux team, which is a video hosting company. And these components are all web components, and they allow you to create really nice custom video players. However, everything that I'm going to teach you will also work with the regular video element. So the only reason that I chose for MediaChrome here is because I like the players they create, not because you can't create a picture-in-picture with only the regular video element. So if you play the video now, it simply plays, and if you scroll away, nothing happens. So that's up to us to create. Now the first step in order to make that picture-in-picture player is that we need to know if our video is currently in view or not. And for that, I want to use a hook used in Vue by the React Intersection Observer package. Because this Intersection Observer is again a JavaScript API that's available in your browser, and the React package simply turns this into a nice usable hook for us, but there is nothing special that you can't do without React here as well. But this package doesn't do anything special that you cannot do without React. So again, if you're not using React, you can simply use the regular Intersection Observer and create what we'll be working on as well. So let's start by importing use in Vue from React Intersection Observer, which is of course a package that I already installed. And this package works as follows. It returns an object where you run this hook. And inside that object, you first get a ref, then you also get an in-view boolean, as well as an entry object. Then this use in Vue takes a few options, but the most important one for us is a threshold. And this threshold you can, for example, set to 0.5, and that tells the Intersection Observer that it should only fire the in-view boolean or change the in-view boolean if the element is visible for more than 50%. However, instead of a regular number, you're also able to use an array. And in there we can, for example, add the numbers 0 and 1. And that way the Intersection Observer will listen to both the element being fully visible as well as being fully out of view, and will trigger twice. So that means that for anything in between, the Intersection Observer won't keep on retriggering, it will only change based on these two values. But in order for this hook to know what it should track for being in view, we need to take that ref and add that onto a specific element. So the element we want to test whether it's in view is in this case the wrapper of our video player. So on there, we're going to add this ref and set the ref as a value. And the reason that I'm not going to add this to the media controller itself is because if we would add the ref on here, it would always be in view because this element is in a second going to be the element that we're going to make sticky. So it will never disappear out of view. Whereas this element, that's the element that will be left behind, so to say. So that's the element that we can use to test if it's in view or not. So let's see for a second if we would add a console.log. And then we're gonna log the in view as well as the entry. And then we'll open up the inspector, take a look at the console. And then we scroll. Then you see that there's booleans coming up true as well as false. And if we keep on scrolling, you see that this true is still there, and then it goes to false because we triggered the 0 threshold. And inside this entry object, there's, for example, a property is intersecting, which could be false or true, which means if the element is currently in view or not. Then if it is intersecting and we would open this object, you also see that there's an intersection ratio. So this tells you the amount, the percentage that this element is currently in view. So in this case, it was over 99% was visible when it was still being triggered. And then once it went over that threshold, it changed to false. And you will also see that the is intersection ratio changed back to 0. Because there is nothing in view. So now the question is, how can we use this to create our picture-in-picture player? Well, what I would like to suggest is that we create a new variable called isFloating. And for that, we're going to use React Memo, because we're going to change this variable based on a few things. And what are we going to change it on? Well, we're going to change it both on the InView variable as well as a property of the entry object. And based on this Boolean later, we're going to apply some CSS to make the element sticky or not. So first, I'm going to take two variables out of this entry object just so it's a little bit easier to work with. We both have the Boolean is intersecting as well as the intersection ratio, which I default to 0 if it's not set on the object. So let's start with a very first easy step. Let's say if it is intersecting, then it won't be floating, so we return false. And otherwise, for now, we just make it sticky. So this way we return either false or true as a value for this isFloating variable. So let's say we're now going to use this isFloating variable to position our element a little bit differently. Let's go to our media controller, which is the wrapper component of our video element, as you can see here. And we're going to add some dynamic class names. So for that, I already went ahead and installed the Tailwind merge package, which helps us to render conditional classes or conditional Tailwind classes even. So let's import that as well from Tailwind merge. Because with that package, we can now add a second argument to that function. And we can, for example, say if isFloating, then it's going to be fixed, and otherwise it will be relative. So that means that if we now start scrolling, and once it isn't intersecting anymore, so once it is not in view anymore, it should become position fixed. So let's see what happens if we scroll now. You see that all of a sudden there's this jump happening because the video is suddenly centered in the screen. And that is because it is becoming position fixed. It's not positioned in any correct place right now, but you already see where we are going, right? So let's tweak this a little bit more. Let's say if it becomes fixed, it's right 6 as well as a bottom of 6. And we also make this a width of 300 pixels. So this way, if we now scroll, you see that all of a sudden we already have a sticky player on the bottom right. That's pretty neat, right? However, what you also see is that if you scroll, even when the player is not playing, it still becomes sticky. And that's of course not really what we like. Before we start with tackling that, let's first add a nice animation to make things look just a little bit better. The way we are able to animate this video in a nice way is actually by triggering keyframe animations. Because if we add a keyframe animation on top of that element, it will simply run that once and we will, for example, see a nice fade in happening. So for that, we're going to go to the Tailwind config, because in there I'm able to define a few new keyframe animations that we're gonna need. And because I don't want to bore you through that with me typing, I'd rather paste them in and then explain them to you in a second. Because I added in 2 keyframes as well as 2 animations, which is Tailwind's way to declare a new animation. Here you define your keyframes and then this is the animation that you're creating. So I added in 2 keyframe animations. The first one is video inline, which simply fades the video in once we add this animation to the component. And the second one is video sticky, which also does a fade in, but also moves 50 pixels over the x-axis to the left. And then for both of them, I created an animation out of them that are 300 milliseconds and has a little easing on top of it. And because we have now defined these keyframes in the Tailwind configuration, we suddenly also have class names that we can use with them. So let's go back to our video player. And then next to also doing some positioning, whenever the element is floating or not, we're also going to add in these animations. So if it's floating, we're going to add a class name animate video sticky. And if it's not floating, we're going to add a class name animate video inline. So this way, if we now start scrolling, it will toggle this animate, it will remove it, and it will add the video sticky class name on there, which will trigger an animation that fades in and moves from right to left. So let's see if we scroll. You already see that we have this really nice animation happening only by triggering a keyframe. And also, if you scroll back to the main video, there is a fade-in happening now. It, however, is happening rather fast, so we can't really see when this is happening. So for that, I actually want to add another threshold to this. I also want to add 0.9 as a threshold, which means that once the element is 90% in view, the intersection observer is triggered as well. So we can then do something with that number too. And what I want to do with that 0.9 number is that instead of only checking if the element is in view, I also want to ensure that the element is in view for at least 90% before we put it back in place again. So we're going to add another check on here, and we're going to say if intersection ratio is larger or equal than 0.9. So this way, only if the ratio is larger or equal to 0.9, it will unsticky itself, and otherwise it will be sticky again. So if we now scroll, you notice that it becomes sticky too early, because we want to have this logic if we scroll back up, but not if we scroll back down. But that's something we will tackle in a second, because let's assume that we already have this sticky video player and we scroll back. Now you see that it waits pretty long before it becomes unsticky again, and then we see a nice fade-in happening. So that actually is already really nice. So the next thing that I want to add is that we don't make the video sticky if you're not playing the video right now. And for that, if we inspect this element again, then you notice that this media controller component adds a lot of data attributes on here. And that is one of the reasons that I really like the Mux Media Chrome player, because based on these attributes, we're able to also do some styling. And one of the attributes you can see is media paused. So this way we know whether the element is currently playing or not. And if this media paused attribute is on there, we simply don't want to make our player sticky. On top of that, if you play the video and then you pause it again, you see that there's also a media has played attribute. So based on this attribute, we will also know whether the user played this video before or if it hasn't clicked the play button at all yet. But first things first, let's make sure that we don't make the video sticky if the video is currently not playing. So for that, we need to be able to get to this data attribute. And now the way that this ref works of the use in view hook is in a way that you can't simply use ref.current to get this element. So instead of diving into this and explaining what a workaround could be to still use this ref, I'm actually gonna add another ref on here. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a media controller ref equals use ref from React. That starts off as null, and for TypeScript, we're gonna say this is an HTML element. And then we're gonna take this ref and add that on top of our media controller. Ref equals media controller ref. So now we have this ref that we can use to get access to this DOM element. And from there, we can get our attribute. So with this ref, we can then check if media controller ref.current.has attribute media paused. Because if it does have this attribute, then we're also gonna return false. So if it has the media pause attribute, then it won't be sticky. So that's why we return false. And only if it doesn't have this attribute, then it will be able to become sticky. If we start scrolling now, you see that the element does not become sticky until we click play and then we start scrolling. Then all of a sudden the video becomes sticky. And if we go back, it becomes unsticky. However, we are now also able to pause the video in place. And why are you able to pause the video in place? Well, that is simply because our use memo is not updated right now because there is no in-view change being triggered. So that's also why this if statement is not being checked again, because this whole function is not running. So that way you're simply able to pause the video in place and then it will simply stay here. But then you can also click play again and it will continue. But if it's paused and you scroll back up, it will get sticky in place again, or it will get put back in place again. And if you scroll then, it won't become sticky again until you start playing again. And with that, there is only one thing left that we still have to add to wrap up this player, I think. The only thing that's still missing is a button where you're able to dismiss the picture-in-picture. So let's add that next. So let's go to our media controller and then we're gonna add a button on here. And inside that button, we're gonna add a text, close picture in picture. And that text is probably only available for screen readers because I guess we only want to see an X icon. So let's add a class name on there that says screen reader only. And then let me quickly copy in a nice icon. Okay, and then we're going to add a class name on top of the button, which we're going to position absolute with right 2 and top 2. And let's give it some rounded corners and a background of black, for example. Give it a padding of 2. And let's give it a width of 8 as well as a height of 8. And now all of a sudden we have this X icon. But the thing is, this X icon is now of course always visible, and it should only be visible if the element is sticky. So we can of course fix that with CSS, because we do know that we're adding this animate class on top of here. And based on this class, we could show this button. However, if you're using this animate class and then change something in this button based on that, of course, this is quite prone to breaking because people don't really expect these things to be related to each other. So I'm actually gonna add another class on here, and then we're gonna say is floating. And that class is not a class that does anything with styling, but is simply a class that we use to do something with this button. So that way it's at least a little bit more likely that people assume that there's a relation between this class and something else on the page or in the styles, because it's a non-existing class. And what we can do now is we go into that button and we are able to make the button hidden. And then we can say with some Tailwind magic, dot is floating underscore ampersand, and then we make it block. And then this is a Tailwind class name that applies this display block only if this element, so the button, which is referenced by the ampersand, has a parent that has a isFloating class. So that's exactly what you can see here. This part you could say is button, and then it checks if it has a parent that has an isFloating class. So this way, if we now scroll down and play the video, of course, we scroll down, the element becomes fixed. And if we then hover, we see that this icon is there. And the fact that it fades out and fades in, that's all done by the player, because the player ensures that part of the UI is only visible if the video is hovered. So that's something, because we're using this player, we don't need to build ourselves. And now the only thing we still need to do is also decide what happens if we click on that button. So let's first define a function called const close picture in picture. And that's then a function. And I think in here, we're gonna use some React state. Let's define a new state where we say picture in picture is force closed, and then set picture is force closed. For that we use the use state, and by default it's false. And then inside of our close picture in picture, we're gonna set this to true. And of course I defined my use state inside of the use memo, and it should of course be in the component itself. Because then if this variable changes, we can simply inside of our function say if picture in picture is force closed, then we also don't make it sticky anymore. However, we should of course reset this variable, because otherwise you would never be able to get it back in picture mode. And when should we reset it? I think we should reset it if it's really not intersecting anymore, and we would otherwise also default back to the non-picture in picture variant, because that I think is the moment where you want to reset this variable. So that means that we're also gonna set picture in picture back to false. So let's try. If we play this video now, it becomes picture in picture, and then we click this button, nothing happens. And that of course is because we need to take this close picture in picture and add an on click to our button. Let's try that one more time. We play this video, we scroll, we click this button, and then it's still not working. And that is of course because we're now using this variable that is changing. So it also means we need to update our dependencies inside the use memo. And yes, this sometimes proves that React is getting a bit too complicated, maybe, because the way these things tie into each other, you see that you are able to forget some of these things. So definitely install a linting rule that is called exhaustive dependencies, I believe, that will lint this for you and give you a warning if you forget about this, because otherwise this memo will never update, of course. So now we've also added that in, it should really work. You've probably heard that before, right? So let's see, we play this video again, we scroll away, we click the button, and it's out of picture in picture mode. And if we now go back up and we scroll again, it becomes sticky again. Beautiful, right? The only thing I would still like to add is also pause the video if you close the picture in picture mode. So for that, we can simply go into our close picture in picture function, and we can add media controller ref.current, and then we can query selector the video, because this video does have a pause method that we can simply call. And by calling this pause method on the video element, it pauses playback. So let's test that one more time. We refresh, we play the video, it scrolls away, video is playing, blah, 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 3 seconds. We close it, and the video is paused. And it also means if we scroll away now, it won't get sticky anymore because it is currently paused. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, To me, it's these kind of details in the UI that makes our work so much fun. And yes, of course, I guess this is over a 20-25 minute video right now already, but it's also, there's quite a few concepts I had to teach you. But if you look at the code now, it's a few if statements that I would, of course, add some comments to in real world production code. So please do that if you're writing code like this. But then it's only this variable that toggles an animation and puts the element either back in place or sticky on your screen. And even if it's playing picture-in-picture, because you now have this threshold of 90%, you see the block here, what I do in my videos is I add a small text in here, playing picture-in-picture. So that's definitely still something that you could add as well, because that just makes it a little bit more clear to the user what is happening. But that's all I have for you in this video, and I hope that it again was an interesting video to you. If it was interesting, please leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to this channel if you didn't do so already, because why do you listen to me for 25 minutes and you didn't subscribe? Come on, I need you. But that's all I have for you today. So thanks so much for watching. Definitely check out the links down below as well, so you are able to see the code yourself. You also have a live playground where you can experiment with this yourself. And there's also a link to Frontend FYI Pro, where I teach you all of the magic in frontend. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.